I'm being held by an invisible force.
Mary tried to talk the pleasure back in.
Because I'm worth it. Come on, you remember that slogan, that meme from the early 80s? L'Oreal, because I'm worth it.
Trust your hair to an invisible force.
New formula L'Oreal Elnet.
Because I'm worth it.
At the time, and even now, everyone seemed to be quoting that line, mocking it, muttering it sarcastically whilst buying their nail polish and spa subscriptions. Because I'm worth it. Well, yeah, you are, you know, we all are. At a self-preserving organism, maintaining, continuity-seeking level, we are, like every other life form on this planet, instinctively committed to being worth it. In other words, to not dying. That's what because I'm worth it fundamentally cashes out as. We're not special, we're not chosen, we're not really worth it, we're not elevated worth it, but like our fellow insects and other vertebrates, we're all just wired to persist, to survive, to be worth it, to not die if we can possibly help it. Because I'm worth it is the sound of the self-preservation instinct, my friends. If instincts were selling merch a la Gwynnie's Goop or Gloop or Poop, this slogan would be printed on every SP hoodie, every pot of hand cream. And let's be fair, maybe this instinct is the one that needs a slogan, because out of our three core human instincts, social, sexual, self-pres, this one doesn't necessarily sell itself. It doesn't perform or campaign for your attention. Rather, it kind of justifies, rationalizes, moisturizes, and most importantly, which is the whole point of it, it survives. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about our most foundational, most culturally worshipped, and maybe the most selfish of all our three core drives, the self-preservation SP instinct. Okay, so let's define our terms before we start burning incense and sort of yelling about capitalism. An instinct is not a feeling, it is not a mood, good or bad, or a moral position or a meme. It is a biological imperative, directive, a non-negotiable command issued by our nervous systems, which is to say something completely ancient, pre-verbal, and entirely subcortical. These are directives coming straight from the gut, from the cells themselves, and an internal kind of signal that doesn't need our opinion or our permission to exist. We don't choose to be hungry, we are hunger. We don't decide to want shelter, we seek it. You know, like breath seeks lungs, like animals seek shade, like bears and other creatures shit in the woods. Not these woods, no bears, but you know what I mean. Instincts don't ask, they act. And the self-preservation instinct, in particular, acts to keep us intact, fed, warm, rested, protected. It's all very Goldilocks. Have a look at that video. You know, regardless of what we think we're about or what our supposed purpose in this human manifestation form might be, the self-pres instinct is just trying to keep the show on the road, the sort of the meat suit upright, you know, the system online. Instincts are not fundamentally interested in you or me as a person, your personality type, although, you know, the personality, the ego cage that contains and distorts our instincts is, of course, key to how instincts get expressed. An SP4 is a somewhat different entity to an SP8, but more than that, just like the sexual instinct doesn't really give a flying fuck about your relationship goals, see my last video, wherever that is, there. And social instinct isn't especially concerned with, you know, fairness, equality. So the self-pres instinct, even more than the other two, really doesn't care about your politics, your therapy practices, or even your favorite mindfulness app. Okay, maybe the mindfulness app. What it is most interested in, its core directive, its you only had one job remit, is this: continuity. As Lakovic puts it in his book on the instincts, the self-preservation drive is about the continuation of life, safety, well-being, and energetic replenishment. It is our drive to survive, not in theory, but in this kind of felt physical immediacy and practice. Good question. Okay, so how far back do we need to go before we hit our sort of instinctive ground floor? For self-pres, we need to go way back, like single cell first life forms on this planet back, which is to say about 2 billion years ago. Compare that to the sexual instinct, which shows up around 1 billion or so years ago, actually 1.2 billion, but who's counting, with the emergence of sexual reproduction, right? And then much later, 1 billion years after sexual reproduction, after the sexual instinct, 2 billion years after the self-pres instinct, our social instinct, the baby of the three, also the cutest, the most relational, and I would argue the most idealistic instinct, right? Because, it ain't working out there in Palestine at the moment, NVC, Marshall Rosenberg, social instinct. But yes, a mere 50 million years ago, a blink in the evolutionary terms of our existence. The social instinct makes its sort of shy little debut with those very early mammals who needed to cooperate to survive. You work with me, I work with you, I scrub your back, you scrub blah blah. Meet the stentor, a trumpet-shaped unicellular organism with no mouth, no opinions, no social media, one of the first, because I'm worth it, living entities on this planet, you could argue, he says, going full on Attenborough. Stentors are super simple creatures, one cell, one job. Drop something nutritious near your little stent and whoop, hey presto, stent moves towards it. Drop something not so nice, something a little bit salty, something a little bit sharp, swims away. This is the original because I'm worth it instinct in action. No discourse, no hashtags, just stimulus and response, stimulus and response, stimulus and response, baby. That's what we're looking at here. This is instinctual intelligence at its most basic and unapologetic. A being whose only job is to stay being. And so, bing bong, apex predator, Kronos comes a-knocking, humility check. Are we really that different from unicellular little fella over there? Because once you strip away our personalities, our pretensions, our curated identities, our snazzy shoes, are we really in essence that different from stent or any other self-preserving life form on this planet? Even though we've got us, right? Millions, billions of cells compared to that little guy. We've got the Bitcoin portfolio, the father, the mother complex, the oodles of other issues. The same basic logic runs through your body and mine and theirs, as it does through this little schmuck. Approach what leads or feeds, avoid what harms. Repeat. Self-preservation, as I've said, was the very first instinct to come online, both evolutionarily and developmentally. Babies cry for food and warmth before they smile at mummy or daddy's expectant faces, right? Or start going, right? Organisms protect their boundaries from predators before they form tribes. There is no us before there is a very clear and distinct me, which is to say, an instinctual, because I'm worth it. As Lakovic puts it, all instincts are necessary for survival and are inborn, but self-preservation is primary because it focuses on the individual's body's survival as the root from which everything else can emerge. If you ain't got self-pres manning the life support deck, sitting on the log, you ain't got shit, buddy. No one's, sticking around to be sexy, social, or spiritually inclined with you or to you unless your self-pres instinct brings you out, carries out this sort of quiet, thankless task that it does. as I said in my SX video, wherever that is, the link, the sexual instinct, I'm not here to roast these instincts. I'm just here to commiserate and congratulate those of us who have, yeah, you know, I would say particularly social, high in your stacking. Okay, well, yeah, let's talk about selfishness. Let's talk about self, baby. Let's talk about socks and tea. Let's talk about plans and panic and a fortress built for me. Let's talk about self. Of the three instincts, self-pres, sexual and social, self-pres, SP, is the least performative. As I said, doesn't care what you think, doesn't want your approval. It just wants, fundamentally, 8 hours of sleep, full fridge, locked door. Which might, particularly if, you know, your last girlfriend was at SP9, lead you to ask, is self-pres maybe the most selfish of our three instincts? You know, because I'm worth it, because I'm worth it. Because I'm worth it. I get all the tea. Not you, Steve. Okay, you too, theoretically. But also, not really. Sorry. So let's compare our narcissism, shall we? Okay, self-pres, me and mine, wants to feel safe, warm, fed, not fucked with, back supported, routines intact. Sexual narcissism, me through you, wanting your voltage, your essence, your eyes and ears on my soul. Social, me, but in the group, wanting to matter, like and subscribe, being seen, recognized, ranked, relied on, connected, mirrored. Self-pres, as you can tell from this description, doesn't really need anyone else. It can, and often will, if you look at the sci-fi SP types and how they operate. You know, it could survive in a kind of self-preserving bunker. In fact, when paired with those withdrawn types, 4, 5, 9, it doesn't just tolerate the bunker, it sort of loves the bunker, you know. We loved COVID, us self-pres withdrawal types. Sexual, social need others to plug into, literally, emotionally, metaphysically. So based on this very crude sketch, there is, sorry SP friends, potentially a case to be made for self-pres being the most self-sufficient, self-contained, and thus arguably self-ish of the three instincts. The only instinct that genuinely doesn't require an other or a group to function. It can love, and it does, when fully embodied in a human being. It can share, and it does, when the conditions feel secure enough, but it doesn't need to do either of these things in the way that, let's say, my dominant sexual instinct needs to merge, or my less dominant social instinct still enjoys, you know, I don't know, orbiting around shared values and relational warmth with my fellow Enya nuts, for example. So, if you're super self-pres, you know, like super SP dominant, you may sometimes be thought of as a tad aloof, withholding, hard to access. But what can you do other than, I don't know, keep the delicious snacks and the tea and whatnot, you know, in your bag, and maybe, although probably not, apologize later? No, of course not, of course not. I mean, sorry, self-pres, because, you know, as I made it clear in my last video about the sexual instinct, this instinct, our self-preservation instinct, doesn't necessarily want stable, reciprocal connection either, right? That's more the domain of the social instinct. Sexual wants charged, catalytic connection. It wants to collide, but it also wants transcendence through a kind of obsessive merging. It wants to disappear into the abyss of your pupils, you know. I mean, not exactly, whoa, community-minded, right? But still, somewhat relational in its own intense, boundary-dissolving way. You're going, no, not relational, it's just needy. Okay, yeah. And as for the lovely social instinct, well, that can also, let's be fair, show up quite often as not so lovely, right? Rigid, conformist, hierarchical sort of clusterfuck of norms and niceties. Just ask any cult or multi-level marketing scheme, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. My self-praise is telling me that I'm not comfortable enough. So maybe this isn't really about selfishness. Maybe it's about reference points, right? Self-praise points to this body, this mouth, this home, this thermos, that's mine, this bank account. And sexual points to a you, but more as a mirror or a portal or a rival which needs to be absorbed, outmatched or devoured. Only our social instinct points to an us, however that's defined. None of them are inherently virtuous, none of them are evil, but self-praise is the only one that doesn't automatically, we could say, reach beyond its own perimeter. It keeps to itself. Does it make it selfish? Well, ish, but not without reason. Which makes sense because when survival feels uncertain, arousal, sexual instinct, will undoubtedly collapse into vigilance, connection, social, becoming optional unless allied to self-preservation. And the truth is, the self-preservation instinct doesn't stop once our basic needs are met. It's not tracking reality, but rather perceived safety. So naturally, this perception can be distorted by early experiences, chronic stress, environmental cues. So even in safe conditions, this instinct, as I have learned, may still operate as if we're under threat, keeping others out so as to maintain control, conserve energy, and reduce exposure to anything unpredictable, even if that might include intimacy, spontaneity, or genuine support. It's not going to go. Well, okay. Good question for 2025, which is, we could say, the era of boundaries, biohacking, burnout. We are, I would argue, living in a self-preserving age. Not raw self-pres, not the sort of kind that, sharpens a spear, builds a shelter. No, this is industrialized self-preservation. Anxiety in a silk robe and a cortisol tracking spreadsheet. Safety with the subscription plan. In the UK, we spend around £292 billion a year on our health. £292 billion per annum. And in the US, that's more like 3 to 4 trillion pounds, $5 trillion, most of it designated to prolong the body's comfort and control. You could say that we have turned our instincts into infrastructure. Of course we have, we're stupid humans, right? Outsourcing what's left to the algorithm, to cold plungers, financial literacy for women over their 30s, gluten-free meal prep, sleep hygiene, trauma-informed kettlebell routines, magnesium, oat milk, and of course, lots and lots of breathing, aka breath work. We're not post-instinctual per se, we're just hyper-instinctual now, kind of branded and monetized instinctual. This is no longer instinct as animal wisdom, but rather instinct as a lifestyle brand, a smoothie, or you could say, of kind of fear and optimization and self-love. Because I'm worth it, because I'm worth it, because I'm fucking worth it. Yeah, on one level that's true. There's nothing wrong, as we know, taking care of ourselves. That bird that's cawing over there, that's self-preservation at work, or sexual. Self-preservation or conservation isn't the problem. The problem is what happens when this self-preserving, conserving instinct dominates, understandably, especially at the expense of others, because self-pres, unfortunately, doesn't really scale. Sorry. It wasn't built to coordinate across communities or safeguard the planet, for example. No, it was shaped around 2 billion years ago by evolutionary pressure to keep this organism, just this one, alive. Me and mine, maybe my kids, at a push, or my neighborhood, possibly, or my species, or at least the parts of it that, look like me and believe what I believe in and feel familiar enough to count. But no, not the coral. Max! Okay. Not the insects, especially unphotogenic ones like, cockroaches and slugs, and not the fungal networks or root systems, quietly holding the whole show together underground. Sure, Self-Pres loves walking among the trees in this local country park. It helps him feel calmer, more regulated, able to make videos, but it doesn't really care about those forests 3 continents away or what's being lost. I mean, conceptually it cares, but not really, right? Doesn't really care. It's not malicious, it's just local. And that's because it's wired for what's near, what's familiar, what feels like me and mine. We all say, or rather kind of Instagram post it, right? Our little save the planet messages. But what we usually mean when we do this is, please, 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 pretty please, preserve our experience of comfort for as long as possible. Preserve the Self-Pres fantasy of all these untouched, beautiful, restorative ecologies out there for me one day, or my kids, to potentially visit, recharge in, and then post about in a WhatsApp family group chat. The instinct doesn't ask what the cost is to us of living this way. No, it just wants to make sure that the heating works, the shelves are stocked, and that there's a plane to fly us off to Bali when it all gets a bit too much. So, Self-Pres, not unlike the sexual instinct, becomes a kind of system of avoidance. A tangle of sort of habits and fixations used to create a false sense of invulnerability. Yeah, and that's kind of the crux of it. What began as a way to protect life can quietly become a way of insulating ourselves from the essential vitality of it. But you can't fight an instinct, right? Just like a turtle needs to pull into its shell, so we self-presers need to scan and secure and stock up, which is why so many of us are safe, well-fed, but also anxious, depressed, disconnected. Maybe what we're really tending to here isn't the body at all. It's the idea of the self, this fragile, high-maintenance fiction that demands its physical domain be constantly maintained, purified, upgraded, a self that has no clear edges and yet must be endlessly reinforced. The only problem is that the body, this thing itself that hosts the instinct, right, doesn't support that narrative. The body doesn't believe in the self. It believes in blood pressure, inflammation, cells that sometimes go a little bit rogue. The more we look into it, the less we see the body as this completely harmonious whole, all working together, very social, right? And the more it appears to be a kind of battleground. Even our own immune systems, those loyal internal guards, turn out to have their own agendas. Macrophages, for instance, immune cells whose main job it is to detect, engulf, clean up pathogens and cellular debris, don't just fight disease. In many cancers, they get stuck in, they actually help to spread the cancer. So instead of attacking tumors, they kind of gather around them, protect them, feed them in a very self-pres way. Like, oh, this is now my tumor. Like following the chemical signals that they're given, even when those signals are being hijacked by the tumor. They're not malfunctioning, they're just being perfectly cooperative. Okay, maybe they are more social, those ones. Also, extremely self-preserving, even if not especially helpful for the self, for the body, for the host who's supposedly running the show. But this isn't sabotage, it's just biology. The body isn't a single entity, it's more like a loose federation of cells, tissues, various other systems, each responding unfortunately, fortunately, to local information, trying to do its job so as to live another day. There's no unified command center, no stable I at the controls. So when we talk about protecting ourselves, preserving ourselves, perhaps it is also worth asking, what exactly are we trying to preserve or conserve here? The writer Susan Sontag, riddled with cancer at the end of her life, wrote something like, "The only way to face death is to get rid of the I that is the self." But as her son, David Reef, acknowledges in the book he wrote about her later, she, like we, was fundamentally unable to do that. Sontag clung to the self, as we all do, all the way down to the grave. And who wouldn't, right? It's the most convincing illusion we have. But if that's so, what are we trying to optimize? What are we attempting to preserve? Well, I guess it's the body as self, the self as body, the organism. This thing that we're trying to refine, purify, extend. This thing that doesn't even acknowledge that we're trying to save it. And the self, as we now recognize it, is really just the story that the organism, through its little yappy mouth hole, tells itself and others about itself. A sort of fiction layered over our hardwired instincts, wrapped up in the lovely skeins of very lovely, meaningful, hopefully coherent language, meant to make the whole is what it isness of us look a little bit more, coherent, a little bit more virtuous, a little less like a bundle of impulses in jeans and a t-shirt, drinking raw puer. Or maybe so as to make our instinctive compulsions look or feel like, I don't know, they're a little bit more noble, or purposeful, spiritually endorsed or inclined. So as to give self-pres something to point at and say, that or this is what I'm focused on. Yeah, this is the thing I'm preserving. This is the project. Which is fine. Because, in essence, we are all just stentors, swimming towards the sugar and swimming away from anything acidic, taste-wise, vibe-wise, person-wise, feedback-wise, from salinity, from disruption, from a WhatsApp message that, didn't quite land, towards comfort, coherence, and most importantly, a sense of control. So all good. In fact, kind of perfect, because so my instincts keep on insisting, I'm worth it. Worth touching or merging with, worth being chosen by another sexually or interpersonally, worth feeding, warming, soothing, securing, and maybe, depending on the strength of your social instinct, you might even believe that there is this kind of like we who are worth it, a group, a tribe, a species. In whatever way your instincts are stacked, they can't be refined through reflection or rewired with effort, I don't think. You can't reason yourself out of an instinct or shame it into submission, which is also why, me being triple SX, SX4, SX5, SX8, I'm like, oh fuck. Because our instincts don't really care, right, about meaning or motivation. What they care about is momentum. And as long as the sugar's out there, or the omega-rich granola clusters, or the adaptogenic, mushroom blend, or the organic maca collagen smoothies, we're all gonna just keep on swimming in that direction, right? Because what else is there to do?
Nearly tried to talk the pleasure back into being alive. Reminiscing about the apricots and blunts on pack and ride. Won't call her friends, 'cause she's ashamed of being locked into bed.